Good morning. Well, it is the 1st of July. I've managed to make it right up to the end. A month, I wouldn't say it's not a month and a bit because I missed the 1st of June. So we've got, anyway, last video today. I will show you that block I made from the resin. I've got to take that out of the cabinet. I have got a bunch of questions, only a few, but I'm going to have a sit down. I might even have a sit down during the week and see if I get some more before I put this video out. A few different questions about Cerakoting and this, that and the other, so thank you very much for those. And I'm still going to be grinding them blades. I need to get cracked on with them because there's two orders that I want to sort out. But yes, it's been a bit of an interesting one, and also I'll give you a bit of a rundown of how I think it all went. But I was a bit up late this morning. I think I'm still recovering from the beer festival. It must be an age thing. But yes, let's get cracking with something, shall we? Right, back in the workshop, I've got the pressure pot here. I just need to release the air. Let that go. Perfect. Right, open up this pressure pot and we'll see what we've got regarding the block. Baffle out, there we go. That's the block inside. You might notice that it just comes away from the corners. Well, I'm going to be cutting these bits out, and it's the centre bit that I need for the pine cone to make the handle up with it, so it's not as important. And also it's long enough that those bits won't interfere with the actual knife handle anyway. Right, I need to get my drill, or the torquey thing, and screws off. To the opposite side. Actually, yeah. Just go a pinpoint into a corner. There we go, that's that one. There we go. And that's the block. So it's got the pine cone in the centre, the resin looks like it's soaked in all over the place. Actually, the corners don't look that bad, actually. Right, the way that I've got to work this now, let me move back into light a bit more. I don't cut them in half anymore. I'll tell you what, let me go and find another block and then I can show you with a bit more detail. Right, back again. So this is a pine cone that's been a block that's been split straight down the centre. As you can see, where the pine cone is, you've got the pattern in there. All I find is that it can make the handles a bit thin because I've still got to cut it down again to then put my liners on. There's nothing wrong with doing that, it's more than usable. It's just that if I was starting from scratch, I'd just make the block, I'd trim it off either side, I'd then stick the liners onto the outside of the block, and then when I come to put it onto the knife, I'll split it down the centre. I find that that's a better way of doing it than trying to mess about with the blocks, splitting it down centre, then putting the liners on. Because it's the centrepiece I'm going to be using, it's not the outer bit, so it doesn't really matter about the outside section. Well, like I say, but that's just, how would that go? That way around. Yeah. So, and it prevents if there's any movement or anything like that, which you can always get, especially when you're using resins that are like heat up, that cool down. It's one thing regarding sort of like sanding, even wooden handles. If you've just got a wooden scale and you start sanding it and you warm it up, naturally it will bend. It just will do. It's like a bimetallic strip. One side is colder than other, so therefore it bends round. So you'll find that with wooden handles, with acrylic handles, anything like that. So that's why when I sand stuff down, I'll then place it onto a cold bit of steel. So like my workbench is like a stainless steel bench. I'll place the warm side down onto that, just so it can basically get rid of some of that heat, and then I'll know if it's got a slight curve in it or not. Because the possibility is that you can glue a handle on that's probably got a bit of a bend in it already in tension. That's why you need to clamp a knife up as well when you're gluing them, that when you take it off, then over time it might try and pull apart. Just naturally want to do that. Again, if you overheat it, if you've got a wooden handled knife, I've seen it done, and I know somebody's done it and basically balls the handle up, where they, especially if it's not stabilized wood, got it wet, put the knife onto the top of a radiator, so therefore you're forcing it heat. You don't force dry natural materials like leather, wood, anything like that. It's got to dry out naturally at a nice steady pace. Anyhow, this handle was put onto the top of a radiator. It was force dried as a piece of wet wood, and all it did was just warp and bend away from the handle material, which is what it was going to do anyway. So it's just one thing you've got to be careful about with it. But anyway, that's the what it looks like once it's split in two. This, I've got to put the liners on the outside first, so trim it down, put the liners on the outside first, then I'll split it in half once I put the once I'm about to put it onto the knife handle itself, or to the knife tang itself. So make sure you keep watching my social stuff, and then you'll see what I mean by that. I've actually got one on there, I think, that I did at the beginning of the year. Similar, well, it's going to have a similar finish to what this one is. So I'm going to have a look anyway. But that's that job sorted. So that's another one out the way. So let's look at what to do next. Right, finally going to get on to grinding some bevels. I spent long enough doing different jobs. Things have started to calm down a little bit now. So I'm going to get on with them, start putting all the bevels on them, and then I can get them ready for the next part, which will be hand sanding. However, this is going to be the last bit of the workshop, last bit of workshop video for the vlogs that I've been doing for the last month. I've got some Q&As to do, so I've got between now and the publishing date to be able to get them all filmed, which will be, for me, it'll be next Monday. But for you, it'll be now. There we go, that didn't take long, did it? It might have been a few seconds for you, but it was been virtually a week for me. Right, I've got a few questions. Thank you very much, everybody, for sending them through. It is appreciated. Just basically to go through what I thought how I did with it all. It was a lot of work sorting out a video a day. I don't think I'm going to do it for a while. I am going to try and get out, or at least get out a video a week as I'm going forward. I'm going to move everything for the workshop back onto my Dane and Blades page. So if you haven't subscribed to my Dane and Blades YouTube channel, please do, because I'll be putting everything else onto there, or everything workshop based, and I'm going to keep my Dane Outdoors channel for basically my shooting videos, anything that's barbecue related or out like that. So that's what I think I'll do moving forward. Like I say, thank you very much, everybody. I've got some questions here. I'm going to start off with Mongoose 9594, or Terry. So basically, can you please explain more about the Damasteel, its manufacturing process, its qualities, suitability as a working knife blade, what does it sharpen like, etc., and have I used it personally? And what the difference is between Damascus and Damasteel. So Damascus is what you generally say would be the carbon steel. So two different carbon steels mixed together. I believe originally that things like that was done because you were putting a, not necessarily substandard steel, but a porous steel with a better steel. And they can mix them together, which basically binds them together to make a stronger steel from it. But obviously, the upshot from it, you get a pattern out of it as well. Now, Damasteel is well, it's a company called Damasteel, and they make a very similar thing with stainless. I have used it before. I've got a couple of pieces here. You can't really tell too good on the patterning of them. That one's a
a dense twist, so basically it's almost like lines. It's been basically twisted round and round. And then I've got this one as well called Bifrost. I'll stick a couple of photos in the corner of blades that I've made with it. So the steel that I've got, as you can see on the sticker at the top here, is DS93X is what their trademark for it, and the blend of two steels. Now I did make myself some notes. So the DS93X is made from RWL 34, which is a powdered steel, and PMC 27, which is a razor steel. It is a razor steel with good corrosion resistance and takes a very sharp edge. The reason why you obviously get two different steels is because one will erode faster than the other when you come to etching it, therefore making the pattern sort of like stand out. I don't know how well it's going to pick up on the camera, but when you grind it and sand it, say to 800 grit, you can only just vaguely see the pattern on it. Once you etch it, one steel will stay more proud than the other, and therefore then you can get the pattern to be more visible. And then you can do things like either polish it all up together so both of them are bright, or you leave the lower surface as a different colour, so sort of a light grey, and then polish off the upper surface so you can tell the difference between the two. Basically, they are made from very good steels. Both of those, RWL is a very good steel, like I say, powdered steel, and I would say it was the next grade up to what I usually use. But I'll say a downside, obviously it's got pattern on it, so it looks cool. For cost-wise though, it is immensely different to buying sort of like a mono steel, which I'll come on to again because I know I've got another question. So basically, I wrote down some prices. So basically, Bifrost, which is that one, if you were buying a metre of that, that is 3mm thick and 60mm wide. So that's a comparison size to what I would buy for what I'd usually use, which is Sandvik 14C28N. So 3mm in thickness, 60mm wide piece of steel and a metre long. So the Sandvik would cost about 50 quid basically for a metre of steel. Now the Bifrost pattern from Damasteel in the same sort of size would cost £727. So obviously an extreme markup on the price for the Damasteel. The way that it's made, so the same as you would with any Damascus, you can make pattern, there's various patterns that people make where they'll put either layers of the two different steels together, weld them into a block, heat them up, and then basically squash them together and start twisting and making a pattern out of them all. There's other ways of making, there's sort of like canister Damascus, which is you get a steel tube, fill it full of different scrap end bits of metal, then you can put a powdered steel in between it all, again heat it all up so it's can then be all squashed together and twisted and making different patterns out of it all. It is, like I say, it's still a very good knife steel. They are actually, the steels that are used in it are made as knife steels, so on their own they'd be very good, but it's just the case that they mix them together and make a pattern out of them. It's very difficult to make Damascus stainless steel or Damasteel. The tolerances, the twisting it together, making sure that it actually sticks together, because that's one thing regarding Damascus steel, is that you can buy Damascus steel from, you can find it on eBay and buy it for, I don't know, whatever, a small amount really, but it doesn't mean that they're decent steels to make a knife out of. And also the way that they've been made, if the steel hasn't joined together properly, so there's been some scale in there, or it just hasn't been cleaned properly, there's no flux or anything, air's got in there, and basically it's oxidized, and if you've got a section that's not stuck together, you've got a potential place where the steel could crack under use, under flexing it or whatever, or basically when you come to heat treat it, it might just fall apart anyway. So Damascus has got to be made properly and twisted together properly, otherwise it's basically just a piece of steel that'll collapse at some point. But Damascus steel, very nice steel. I have used it. I'll bag some photos in of knives that I've made out of it before. I don't make that many. Generally, it's if a case, if somebody orders one that's in a particular pattern, then I'll use it just because of the cost of the steel. And it's to make a knife out of it and put it to one side and leave it there for a long period of time, because obviously you've got to charge a reasonable amount for it just to pay for the steel part of it all. But it is nice to use, and I do like to use it when I can. Thank you very much, Terry. Right, next one. I've had to write them all down so I know who I've got. So, Steve, Mr. Deer Dog, do you make swing knives? And if so, could you show us how to make one? I don't make them, simply. The only thing that I have done when it comes to swing knives is sort of like such as the EKA or Outdoor Edge, I think is another one, where it's a blade that's got a gut hook style blade on it, a tripe knife or whatever you want to call it, and a normal blade. Press a button, you can swing it around, so you've got the two knife blades within one. I have rehandled the EKA. I don't know if it's EKA or Eka or whatever. I have rehandled those before and made new sheaths for them. It's not my favourite job in the world, I must totally admit, because it's a bit of a faff to take them apart and put them back together, but it's one thing that I have done. But I don't make my own blades to do that with. I've usually, if somebody wanted a conversion, then I've done that in the past. So that's fairly straightforward. Next one from Kev. Al, could you do a bit on the different types of grinds for blades and what they're best suited for, flat, Scandi, micro, etc.? Right, so it's a minefield. Right, I did print off a piece of paper with all the different blades on it. You can find these online, and what I'll do is I'll stick a picture in the corner of what each one is I'm going through it. So start off with a Scandi grind. Now Scandi grinds are a single bevel on either side in a V shape. They go up generally about maybe a quarter, a third of the way up the blade. Quite common in bushcraft style of blades. You definitely see the ones from, let's see, I think Emberleaf has started making the Ray Mears Woodlaw knife. Ben Orford does a lot with Scandi grinds. Full enough, I have made Scandi neck grind blades, and I do occasionally make them when people ask for them. So that's something like that. So it's just got that one small bevel, and it just like comes down to a V. Generally, the angles on them, I do mine to 13 degrees. Can make them slightly narrower, so 10 degrees or whatever, or if you want it a little bit wider, you can do. It's generally for carving, splitting wood, carving wood. That's why it's quite common with the bushcraft sort of knives. Like I say, I do make them, but generally if people want them. But that's going for a Scandi. I'll come on to what I would use, what I prefer on my knives. Next one, convex grind. So that's basically where the blade is curved outwards, so it's coming down to a point. You'd find that axes have got sort of like a convex grind on them. Reason is it comes round with an axe. It's used for not just cutting wood, but for splitting wood as well. So therefore, as the blade comes down to hit the piece of wood, because that it's rounded off, it wedges the blade out. So it's basically like a wedge. So it wedges the blade out, wedges the wood, so it basically for splitting the wood. So you've got a sharp edge, comes to a rounded edges, and it comes down. Doesn't even necessarily have to be sharp, to be honest, because you can get splitting mauls, which are basically for splitting wood. They don't have necessarily a sharp edge on them, you just have to bray it hard enough. Sorry if there's any wind noise, hopefully it's clearing up. Chisel grind, so basically you've just got one grind on one side of the blade. I think katanas, sort of like Japanese sort of blades, they would have them on. I've never really used one myself, to be honest, or made one. Benefit of it, I would say benefit of it, chisel. That's got a single chisel grind, obviously it's called a chisel grind. So basically when you're cutting something, one piece of wood, like for we're using it as a chisel, one piece of wood pushes away rather the other, bottom side doesn't. So therefore it moves wood out of the way on one side more than it does on the other. There's also where I've seen it where the grinds are different on both sides. So one might be quite a high. If you're looking at a Scandi grind, you've got a short on one side and a long on the opposite side. Again, it's doing that similar sort of thing. You can still use both, sharpen both edges to get it into a nice sharp point, but one pushes material out of the way more than what the other side does. Next one, a sabre grind. Right, so actually no, I'll go to a flat grind first. So I use generally on most of my blades, I've got a flat grind. So I've taken as you can see here, I've taken the grind up to the top. Still a little bit more room that it could go up to, but that's generally the distance that I take it. I've got a little square there where I'd put my logo. Now a sabre grind would probably come down maybe 2/3, halfway to 2/3 up the blade. So if I just put a line as an example, maybe a little bit further up. I used to use a sabre grind, and the reason I use a sabre grind is because, if I can find it somewhere, I used to stamp in my logos. Basically, before it was heat treated, I'd basically put this onto a press and I'd press the logo into the side of the blade. Don't have to heat it up or anything like it on cold press when it's steel soft enough. Since I've bought my laser engraver, I don't have to do that anymore. So what I've started on is moving on to basically a flat grind. It's not technically a flat grind, but I'll come on to that in a minute. So what I used to do beforehand was use a sabre grind. So I used to basically take the grind up to the bottom of where my logo was and then put a secondary bevel on the edge of it. Now this, I say it's a flat grind, it's more like a hollow grind. If you've been watching the video so far, you'll have seen where I've talked about my radius platen. So the edge that I go along and grind the bevel on is actually slightly curved. So therefore I'm actually making a hollow grind as opposed, so it's got that concaved edge rather than it being completely flat. It's very slight. To be honest, it's difficult to tell that it's there. It's just that when I come to sand it, you still got a little bit of an indent in the centre. You could hand sand it, and if you do a lot of hand sanding, you end up sort of like rounding the edges off the top of it, making it almost into a convex grind. But because I start with a hollow grind, it doesn't go much more than a flat. Now, there are what you could call a full flat grind. So let's say, back to this and call it a flat grind. Full flat would be basically taking the grind from the top, taking it right down to the edge, and both sides would meet, and that would be what your cutting edge. So you'd find those on very, very fine kitchen knives. I think it's Sheffield knife sharpener. If I've got the name wrong, I'll put it right in the description below. He does a lot of knife sharpening, a lot of cutlery knives, and basically does a full flat going down to basically where like I say, it meets at the end. I don't do a full flat, I do a flat grind then with a secondary bevel. So this angle here is probably about 2.5, 3 degrees, something like that. And then the final bevel, I'll put another bevel on where it's 20 degrees aside for any flat grinds or sabre grinds or anything like that. Basically put them at 20 degrees. I find that's a nice cutting edge. When it comes to the not sabre grind, but a Scandi grind, like I say, that's a carving edge. I'm not a massive fan of using a Scandi grind as a deer stalking knife. Reason for that, you've got a fine edge, you've got more chance of chipping a fine edge, you've got more chance of damaging it against bone or anything like that. I know some people say that they have knives and they'll quite happily go through sternums, that's fair enough, and it'll last forever. They don't. It's simple. If you're using a knife how it should be used, it will not last forever, and it needs to be maintained. But obviously you've asked, that's another question, and that's for a bit later on. So basically I put a 20 degree bevel on. I find that the 20 degree bevel has what I would say was enough meat behind the edge, so it's got enough steel behind the edge that it can keep, it's got its strength there. It's sharp enough that it'll do any job. You can make it shaving sharp, but it's got a bit more durability than using a finer edge from a Scandi. that's my opinion. I could be totally wrong, but that's why I use a secondary edge, and that's what I recommend for people. If you want something that's a bit more bushcrafty for carving, whittling, splitting wood or anything like that, yeah, fine, go for a Scandi. But like I say, I use either a flat grind or hollow grind with a secondary bevel. That's my preference. I think that's all of them, so I'll just put a picture of them all up together. Any more questions? You can always ask. Right, so that's that one done. Let's cross them off. I hope that helps, Kev. If not, let me know and I can do it again. Let's have a look. Cerakoting. One question is for your Cerakote knives. Are they dishwasher safe? Do they hold up to use without losing its coating? Would be interesting to know. Well, this is one from Mike. Yeah, dishwasher safe, it's not a problem. Cerakoting is a ceramic polymer paint, basically, which if you're looking to firearms quite a lot of basically if you're getting a firearm painted, it's probably done with Cerakoting. I know I was watching recently for What's This Weapon, which is done by the Royal Armouries, and they were talking about the SA-80 and the L3, or the later version of the SA-80, which was upgraded by Heckler & Koch, and their foreign units, whatever they're calling them, were Cerakoted. So basically it's an extremely durable paint. Yes, you can put it in a dishwasher. In fact, I've got one in the dishwasher now that I'm just going to leave in there and continuously do cycles on just to see how it coats, but I don't think there'll be any issue with there whatsoever. How durable is it? To be honest, I couldn't say for definite how durable it is. It is very durable. If you look on there, on the Cerakoting website, I'm sure you'll be able to find out a lot of information, but basically it will wear over time because anything will. And again, I'll come back to that. If you're using it right and if you use it continuously, it should have wear on it. But I've got another thing that I want to mention about that anyway. But yeah, Cerakoting. I'm going to do a separate video just on Cerakoting, just to have a bit more information on it, because I thought it just might be a little bit too much for this one. So there we go, Mike. I hope that helps, and keep watching. Again, I'm going to put that onto my Danem Blades page rather than my Danem Outdoors one. Right, Craig. Thank you very much, Craig. Hi, all. Would you consider making leather shooting sandbags? Would I consider it? Possibly. Have I got any plans to? Not really. Not at the moment. It's for me. I mean, I'm just like a single person making things. Would I can make them. Is it worthwhile me making them? At the minute, I would say no. Just because I don't have... If I'm making them as a one-off, the amount of time that goes into them, I'd have to charge a silly amount. Well, I would consider, being a Yorkshireman, a silly amount for them, because you can get sandbags, many different sandbags all over. If I had to change a kit, possibly. The sewing machine that I've got, it's great for sewing leather. It's great for sewing thick leather, so something like on a knife sheath, even though I do them by hand, it would sew through that, not a problem. It's not great for sewing thin leather. I need sort of like an intermediate from between a dressmaker's sewing machine, sort of like somewhere in between, which would be a leather worker's sewing machine for stitching bags, all sorts of bags up, thin leather and webbing. So I probably will at some point get myself another sewing machine to be able to do jobs like that with, but probably, like I say, as a one-off. I think it's, at the minute, it's not in the plan. Like I say, maybe in the future I'll probably go into it, but not quite yet. So there we go, Craig. But no doubt I'll see you in a bit anyway, because you've got to pick your knife up. It is done. I ought to send you a message. You can always get a mug as well. Right, one from Ian. Wondering what knife you make which would be recommended for doing roe deer, and that can get around the anal passage, or the anal tract as I was told it was called, tight places, etc. Right, So I've got a few blades at the front. No doubt you'll have seen them as I've been going along. This isn't all the knives that I've made. I'll just put that to one side. I'll tell you what, I'll stop the wind blowing about. And I'll put those bits of steel to one side so I'm not scratching anything. These are all what I would call my catcher blades. So the original catcher is that one. So it has got a small blade on it. I think the cutting edge is about 2 3/4 inch? Something like that. Catcher handle. So the catcher name refers to the handle shape. That one's made out of 2.5mm steel. Made it with a friend of mine, well, with Simon Whitehead, the guy that writes for Shooting Times and does all shows and what have you, for ferreting and things like that. So basically, it's for using on small mammals. You could probably breast out birds with that and what have you. It's not quite a bird and trout knife because they're usually thinner and longer. But basically, that is the catcher blade, small utility knife, I would probably call that. Moving on to the next one, which is where my recommendation would go for Ian, which is the muntjac knife. So again, same shape handle. So again, catcher handle. This has got, again, 2.5mm steel blade. I used to make this style of knife originally with 2mm steel. And that was when I had to stamp the logo into the blade, and I'd put a Scandi grind onto it. Since I've got the laser engraver, I can laser engrave my logos in. So, and because of that, I started doing flat grinds with a secondary bevel. But I found that the 2mm steel, for me, was just, gave it a little bit too much flex. I have got some knives that are made out of 2mm steel, which are my muntjac lights that I've got, which are more of a basic build. They've got the either orange or green G10 handle, acid etch blade, and a flat grind on it. A little bit more flex to it, but that is probably the best knife for basically cutting round the back end, round the anal tract, all the tight places. It's a long enough blade that you can do a thoracic bleed with it, but then it's nice and small or thin blade so you can get round places, all the little nooks and crannies. This one, Kydex sheath, which you'll have seen as, well, I don't know if you have seen us make it, I can't remember if I put it in it or not, but with the sculpted handle, G10, so that basically is a bulletproof sort of knife. This actual setup, to be honest, the whole thing can go in a dishwasher. So the Kydex needs to go up to about 150 to be nice and pliable, 150 degrees centigrade, sorry. Dishwashers go up to about 60, so it doesn't start bending the plastic. The knife itself, because it's got a G10 handle, it's not going to come apart. You're not getting it hot enough to damage the epoxy, because again, if you put it in boiling water, that helps break down the epoxy if you ever needed to come down and break the handles off, which I have done in the past. I've changed handles for people. Again, it's a bit of a faff, you might as well buy another knife. But that's the one that I would probably recommend for up to size of a row. To be honest, you can do anything with that because of its size. You can do everything with a small knife that you can do with a big knife, but not necessarily the opposite way around, because a big knife being a bit more cumbersome. There's sort of like, I would say, the American market. I don't know if this is right. If Dan, if you're watching, you can probably tell us if I'm right or wrong. But there seems to be a liking for using a bigger knife, because they might be keeping out a larger animal. I mean, if you're going for elk or moose or whatever, then a larger knife might be a little bit more easy, but that's just an idea. Next one is my roe catcher. Again, same handle. Developed originally from my roe stalker style. So you can see from that, the handle shape is different. So it's a little bit wider, that handle. But basically the blades are very, very similar. I've got the idea from using that blade, but in the catcher handle. So the roe variation, these are made out of 3mm steel. So it's a bit more robust. And I would say as a do-all knife would be going onto the roe catcher or roe stalker. I've sort of like moved on to using my catcher as my main handle. So I would say that's my signature style of knife now. So yeah, roe catcher, 3mm steel, a bit more robust, take probably a bit more hammer, and yeah, blade length, I think these are about 90. I think the muntjac is about 5mm shorter, something like that. Yeah, so say that's a cutting edge or a blade of 90. That's got a 95 on that one, so it's a tad longer. More suitable for having sort of like a bigger rounded handle on it as well, so making the handle size a little bit thicker, just because it balances out better for the handle, going towards the blade. Not that it makes much difference. There is I think very much when it comes to knives, there is a bit of personal preference. So that's the row style. Then I got my longer version, which is the fallow catcher. So similar to the row, but maybe not quite as much of a drop on the end of the point because it being a little bit longer. Better for the larger species of deer. You've got a little bit longer on the blade, so therefore again, if you're going for a thoracic bleed, you can put the knife in a little bit further. You've got that more space in the cavity, you can swing it around your diaphragm. But basically, again, it comes just to a longer blade. Personal preference, if you like using a longer blade or prefer a longer blade for the job, it's the fallow that's the type that you want for that. Again, I make the fallow catcher and I make a fallow stalker as well. So similar to the row stalker, but I think it's 20mm longer on the blade. So both variations. I do have another knife that I call my ghillie, which is more of my bushcrafty sort of size. That's split into 3 different sizes. So that's got the ghillie short, which is about a 3-inch blade, the ghillie, which is a 4-inch blade, and the ghillie long, which is about a 5-inch blade. I make my ghillies generally out of 4mm steel because they're more of a bushcrafty blade, bushcraft camp blade, so it's again a bit more robust making it out of 4mm steel as opposed to 3 and 2.5. So hopefully that's a bit of a rundown, but basically if you wanted a knife for up to the size of row, being able to get around the back end, then my recommendation for that one is the muntjac. So I hope, Ian, that is all helpful for you. Scribble that one out. Right, what's this one? Oh, right, yeah. Paul, so out of the different steels, which do you prefer to work with and why? Also, how did you get into knife making? Right, Paul, so preferred steel, well, first of all, steels that I use ABL, Sandvik 14C28N, and I also use occasionally SF100. SF100, which is Silver Fox 100, it's a Sheffield steel, so it's nice to use Sheffield steel, bear in mind that I'm in South Yorkshire. ABL, I've got a load of row stalkers and fallow stalkers that have been laser cut out of ABL, so I'm gradually working my way through those. Those are the only 2 that I've got laser cut, all the rest of them I've cut out with the use of a bandsaw and my grinder. Again, it's a good steel to use. Both of them are, I think ABL was originally a razor blade steel, so it's made for good sharpness and corrosion resistance. But I generally use I would say all these ones here are all made out of Sandvik 14C28N. That's probably my go-to steel. There's no special reason why, it's just I've got used to using it. I like the way that it works. To be honest, ABL, SF100 and 14C28N are all very similar steels, just made by different people. So to be honest, not necessarily interchangeable, but like I say, different manufacturers, but they're very similar. This one, which is the mini cleaver that I've made, not an ideal design. What I've realised is that's a little bit too low, but that's made out of eveyone tool steel, which is a carbon steel, which to be honest is, for any knife maker, has probably made a knife out of eveyone, just because you can get it, especially I can get sort of what I call a scrap sheet from Phoenix Steels in Sheffield that's probably about so big, which they're selling for scrap, which would probably be enough to make about 30 blades out of. And you can buy it for, I think the last piece I got was maybe about 25 quid. I mean, it was a while back, but to be honest, I don't think there's going to be a great deal much more, like. What other steels have I used? I've used B-cut, I've used Nylox, I've used RWL 34, I've used L-Max. There is a bit of a grade, so I would say the next one up from 14C, SF100 and what have you, the next one I would probably used was RWL 34, which is a powdered steel. So basically it's ground up, smelted, so the crystals are slightly different. The strange thing is, you can tell when you're drilling it, it drills differently to what the other steels do. It's almost like drilling through butter, which might sound stupid, but that's how it seems to me. I do like using that steel. I would say one of the reasons I don't is sort of like cost-wise. So again, with my notes. So like I say, the Damasteel for a piece that is 3mm by 60mm by 1000mm, so a metre length, that was 725. Sandvik for the same sort of size is £50 a metre. So you can tell the difference there. Now RWL, there's two different sizes that I can buy it from, and I buy it from Barman Steels, who's basically is based not very far away from me, so I can drive to him in sort of a quarter of an hour. So that's Richard Area that's there. If you're ever interested in buying steels for a blade, go to Barman Steels. So RWL 34. You can't actually buy it in 60mm widths, but you can buy it in 51mm widths, which for some blades is all right, but it's not for my knives. So for something like that, it's too wide for making one out of it, and it's too narrow for making two by straddling them, which I can do for all the rest of them. So it's because it's 51mm wide. So, and it's 33.2mm thick. Not that it makes a great deal of difference. So say 32 by 51 by 1 metre in length is basically £99. That's probably not, I don't know if it's 99 plus VAT or it's 99. Anyway, it's 100 quid. But if I wanted to buy 3.2 by 32mm wide, which would be the right width for making a knife like that by metre length, it's £70. So if I wanted to buy 2 pieces of that, which would make the same amount of knives that I can do out of the Sandvik, would cost £140 as opposed to £50. Cost-wise, for the actual knife itself, it's probably not a massive amount different, because the majority of the cost in the knife is making it. It's just the time. So the handle, so say for a knife, I could probably make it, I don't know, say if you put 20, 30 quid onto the price, maybe a bit more. Because like I say, the price comes into actually making the thing. The material cost, not necessarily. You can add those all up, put whatever, because obviously you've got to put profit onto everything and what have you, and then time for actually making it. So it doesn't really interfere too much. But again, it's if you've got steel that's just stood about doing nothing, it's a lot to be spending out just for it to sit there. I do make RWL 34 knives. If anybody does ask for a particular steel, I'll try my best to make it out of that. I don't put that there for a minute. If I go back to this one, I take my blades up to 800 grit. I don't polish them. I'm not a massive fan of polishing blades. I have seen blades that have been polished up and you can still see the scratch marks from 36, 60 grit. 60 grit scratches out at belt or whatever and then polished over the top. To me that looks crap. I'd rather just take it to a nice satin finish, 800 grit. Certain steels you cannot get up to 800 grit. Nylox being one of them. I've a friend of mine who's a mould polisher for like injection moulds for plastics. He's very good at polishing things, and you know it's Tony from Mason Bushcraft Knives. He knows how to polish steel up, and he's had a go at it, and he went, can't do it. I can take it up to about 600, and that's about it. So not all steels will polish, but when it comes down to that, it's corrosion resistance and how well it wears. So when it would come to how well that you can sharpen it, I'm not entirely sure. I've used it, but I've never finished a knife off with it. I've sharpened it and I've got it hung up on a board somewhere, but that's about as far as I've gone. So preference, I would say my favourite overall would be RWL 34. Other ones I've used is D2. D2's high-end carbon steel, so it's virgin on stainless, but it's still classed as a carbon steel. Like I say, B-cut is another stainless steel. All my knives generally are made out of stainless steels, unless somebody asks for a carbon steel one. The reason I do that is because not everybody knows how to look after a carbon steel blade, and if you've got to look after it. Bushcraft community like the carbon steel, but they're more of a people that will look after a blade. Deerstalkers, myself included, I just want things to work. So as long as it works, I'm happy, and I don't want it to be high maintenance, because if you're out deer stalking, you've got a lot of work to be worrying about, not just trying to find the deer and shoot it, but you've got to sort it out, you've got to take it home, you've got to process it, you've got to look after your rifle, you've got to look after all your gear, and having to take your knife out of a leather sheath, especially a carbon knife, you can't leave in a damp sheath because it'll just start rusting, so therefore you've got to take it out, you've got to oil it, you've got to clean it. At least with your stainless steel blade, you've got a chance that it's not going to do that. Remember, it's stainless and not non-stain, so it still needs looking after. It'll last a bit longer before you do have to look after it. But so preference RWL 34, but I generally use Sandvik 14C28N, AEBL and SF100 are my main. I would say 14C28N is my go-to steel. But there we go. I hope that's. Oh yeah, the other part of that question: how did I get into knife making? Just a minute, I'll go and find something. No, don't matter, couldn't find it. Basically, there is a magazine called Bushcraft and Survival Magazine, and in one of the articles, 14 years ago or so, it said basically how to make your own bushcraft knife, and it showed you how to make a simple bushcraft knife out of basic materials. Hang on a minute, that I can show you. There we go. So my first ever knife. This is made out of eveyone steel, so basically same as this one. I polished it up to the best of my ability. It's gone a bit rusty on one side because basically this lives in the cupboard above my workbench. So it is your sort of standard bushcrafty knife sort of shape. The edge on it is fair. I wouldn't say it's perfect. I put the bevel on with using a bit of wood as a jig, and I used a 1x32, one of those little sanding belts, sort of sanding type grinder thing. It's got a bit of beech as a handle, I think, that has over time has probably swelled because it has split away from the wood. It's got some brass pins in it, which I can see from this side doesn't look like it's been drilled square, or I didn't clamp it down when I drilled it because it's I can see there's a bit of resin down one side of it. But basically that is the first knife I did. Since then I basically just carried on as a hobby, and as most of the things do, or a hobby just got out of hand and I just kept on making. So basically I've gone from making things like that, or as my first one, to making knives like that. As you can see, no logo or anything. It will cut stuff, but it looks like somebody's first knife. I don't know how many I've made altogether. I never really numbered them. I didn't think I'd met that many. But I've done a few. And so there we go. And like I say, it's just a hobby that got out of hand. I started getting more equipment, being able to make better and better stuff. You don't need it to start making a knife. You can do it with a bunch of files by hand. I heat treated this by putting it into I had a tub full of charcoal that I blasted air in with a little compressor. Get that up to about 830 degrees centigrade, I think it is. Basically till it's non-magnetic, so I couldn't even tell you that I got it to the right temperature. Well, I know it got to the right temperature because it became non-magnetic. So it was about 830, 850 degrees or whatever it is for 01. Quenched it in oil, just basically cooking oil, and then I tempered it with a blowtorch, a gas torch, going along the spine and watching the colour change. So basically this spine probably went down to purple, which basically brings it back soft, but the blade edge was a straw colour, which in theory is about the right sort of temperature to make it tempered and for it to hold an edge, which it does in a fashion. But yeah, so it's a hobby that got out of hand. Right, thank you very much, Paul. I hope that answers your question, but like basically going back to steels, 14C 2810, it's probably one I use most. I'd use RWL if people wanted it a bit more. Right, what have I got next? Ah, yeah. As somebody that, this is from Mark, so as somebody who would like to get started in leatherwork, I'd appreciate a few basics. Right. It probably warrants a video on its own, but I'm going to go through the tools that I would use to make a knife sheath. So this leather that I use is veg tan leather. Numerous places where you can get it from, but I'll put a link below where I get it from, which is, I'm going to say this wrong now, Lepavro. I put Lepavro and it's Lepavro. Whatever. Based up at Newcastle. I shouldn't say whatever because they're a great little business to work with. And I've got a tray here of all little things that I've got. So I've got a knife sheath out of leather. I need to cut it out. I use a Stanley knife. There's lots of craft knives, leather crafty knives that you can use. But to be honest, I've always used my Stanley knife, so it's my basic go-to. I've also got the I think I used it in a video not so long back. So basically a cutter that's it basically cutting ends of straps, but it's just ideal for going around the belt loop. So round the bottom edges and then round the top to make a nice curve. Obviously that's not essential, and that's probably one of the more expensive little bits of tooling that you can buy. You can still use it with a craft knife or a Stanley knife, even if you're cutting around a 2p piece or anything like that. It still works, so it's not essential, but it's nice to have. A metal ruler of some kind for cutting along straight edges. This one, so basically it's a cutting ruler, so you can put your fingers on inside of it and you're less likely to slip and cut your finger, which you can do with that one. Touch wood, I haven't done it myself, but now I've said that, I'll probably slice the end of my finger off. So that's everything that I need to cut the sheath out. Next job would be, I would say for drawing round bends, a bendy ruler from a craft shop. They're not a lot of money, and they're just a handy thing to have. So again, not essential, but it's a good thing nice thing to have. Next thing I would use is this. So it's a tool for putting a groove around the edge, which is what I'm going to make for my stitching line. Stitching line groover. You can do one that's not necessarily cut out, but will just crease the leather. If you look online for them, they're not a lot of money. There are some companies out there that make some nice bits of kit, but the more sort of like pricier bits. These things, you can find loads of them on eBay, Etsy or anything like that. You can buy a kit of stuff with tools in it, and they're more than usable. Like I say, I've had a lot of these things for 15 years, well, maybe 10, 14 years, something like that, for using leatherwork. But yeah, anyway, creasing tool. So that's what I've put my line in for making my stitching. The next thing I'd use is my pricking irons. So that with a mallet, and basically you're going along your leather, stamp it down, and you're putting a marker in, you're cutting the leather. You can drill leather, but it's not advisable to drill leather. You don't want a hole in it as such, because the pricking iron just splits the leather off in places. So as you stitch it, over time, the hole will shrink back on itself and tighten up the stitching. If you just drilled it and then stitched it, you'd always have a hole there. And if the stitching ever came apart, it would easily unravel itself. But stitching irons, so pricking irons, and a mallet for the next bit. Right, next bit of tooling. I've got this, which is a edge beveler. This is probably something I have spent a few quid on. I think it's, is it George Barnsley that's based at Sheffield? Leather tooling maker. There's also another, basically anywhere that you can buy leather from, you probably can buy tools from. So you've got Abbey England, you've got Identity Store down at Matlock, which I've bought quite a few bits from. Like I say, Lepavro, Lepavo, however it's said, in my opinion, they have the best veg tan leather that I've come across. And also there is another one that I've bought stuff from. There's another company, Little Bear or something like that, that's on Etsy that I've bought a few bits from as well. But edge beveler, so basically this starts rounding off the edge of the leather. So I've used it on the top of the knife sheaths, so along this edge, inside and out, and along either side of the belt loop. Just when you come to clean it and round it all off, when you bevel it using your edging tool, burnishing tool, it's already rounded off to start with. So that's that bit done. Next job, oh yeah, the little gouge. I use this down the centre of the leather. Again, I used this when I was making me sheaths a few days ago. Not essential, but it's just one of those things that's nice to have. Next bit, what have I got? I would say once you've sorted your leather out, you've dyed it. Dyeing it either using these things. Don't last very long, these ones, when you're using the oil-based dyes, just because the sponge is sort of like it's like a plasticky sort of sponge, a synthetic sponge, so it can break down quite easy. These are the woolen daubers. If you go onto eBay, you can buy like packs of 100 for a reasonable amount of money, and you use these to put your dye on. But either one of those will work. Like I say, once your leather's sorted, you've got it all dyed, you've wet formed it, whatever you need to do, then you come to stitching it. I would use, once I've glued my welt on, I'd actually go along with the pricking irons once again. Was the original way that I'd do it. Glue it all together, and then I'd use an awl. And I'd use this to force a hole through the leather. You do need to sharpen them up. There are different ones, different needles about. I now use my press, my drill press with a needle on it to push through, and I find that makes a neater job, especially with the thicker leather. Thin leather, an awl is quite a useful thing, not just for piercing the hole straight through, but just to agitate it slightly, just basically to widen the hole off when you come to stitching it. Stitching wise, needles, so leather sewing needles and thread. The thread that I use is 0.8 of a mil waxed thread, waxed cord I think this is. Again, I just get this off eBay and I buy it in rolls like that. Just be careful if you are going on eBay and you're looking for different colours, make sure you make a note or take a mental note of the length that you're buying. This is about a 250 millimetre roll, maybe even longer, and I bought 50 metres, not even 50, I think I bought 5 metres by accident one time, that somebody charged me a fortune for just like 5 metres of thread. I think at £3 odd. I mean, 250 metres is like £7, so that bloke were making a fortune, whoever it was. I sent it back, even though it cost me money to send it back. I thought, they've just scammed me out of a load of money. So that's stitching it, using the awl. Final thing would be to use this, which was little wheel. Buy them at different widths apart. So this is there's 5 prongs, so I don't know if it's 5 mil per hole. I've got another, no, actually the higher the number is 5 per inch. Basically this goes around and puts 5 divots in per inch. I've got a 6 per inch as well, but I've used the 5 per inch, and that matches up with my pricking irons, just to need to put up all the thread after I've stitched it. I've seen it done a separate way with using sort of like a hole punch and going one after the other with a sort of a hole punch. That works for me. And then the edge beveler, just to clean up all the edges and polishing them up. And all I do with a veg tan leather, I don't use any burnishing cream or that. It's not essential. You can just do it with water and then use a bit of beeswax on the edge of it as well if you really want to. Or soap does a similar sort of job as well. So just finishing off with that. Other tools that you might need if you're using any catchers or studs or out like that. Hole punchers comes in handy. Match up with any, like I say, you're using press studs. If you are using press studs, then you need like a tool for putting the press studs in, especially if you go into the Identity Store website. It shows you which tooling you need for each different thing, like either rivets, rivet caps or the press studs, and it's just a couple of bits like that, and you just use an hammer for it. So you don't need loads of tools to start yourself off. To be honest, with what I've just showed you, I could probably pretty much make anything from that by hand. Any pouches or out like that. The only other things that you'd probably need, if you were if you're making like what I do with my bullet pouches, which I'll definitely do a separate video making a bullet pouch, you need a form to be able to wet form the front on. But other than that, that is something that you can either make or buy, I'm sure. You can buy templates, you can buy cutters, and to be honest, like I say, those tools that I've showed you would be able to make anything. So I hope that's helpful, Mark, and I will do, like I say, a separate video on it all together. Right, let me just get that out of the way. Scribble that one off. What have I got left? I know I have got a couple. Ah, the last one. Right. This one, loads of people have tagged onto the exact same question. Hi Al, can you do a masterclass in sharpening, how to maintain your knife? I will probably do that as a separate video, but I'm just going to do a quick rundown of looking after a knife with the strop. So the kit that I supply, or I've been selling. So I've got a bit of polishing compound. This is the green polishing compound that you use on a buffing wheel. Just because that's where I've added. Oh, hang on a minute. I'll go and find a couple other bits as well. Back again. Right, other things that you can use. So I started off using Autosol metal polish. Basically, that's all this green compound is. It's a cutting compound for polishing up leather, polishing up steel. Autosol is the same sort of thing. If you wanted to go a bit more professional, technical, correct, whatever you feel. This, which is honing compound, which is made by Tormek to use on their sharpening systems. There's a little leather wheel, which is like a suede sort of wheel, that you basically put the Tormek honing paste onto just for finishing off a blade. So that can be used as well. Something else you can use is Jeweler's Rouge, which is basically a softer version for that, because it's used for, is the right word, non-ferrous metals, so such as gold and brass and what have you, which is slightly softer. It's a softer compound, but it still works. And also diamond spray. I do use a diamond spray, and if you remember early on when I was sharpening a unzipper, I was using, or a zipper as I think I call them, I was using a diamond spray on my piece of leather as for stropping it. Anyway, coming back, got my strop. It's a double-sided strop, so you've got the suede side on one side, you've got the smooth leather on the opposite side. Get your stropping compound. Like I say, it don't matter which one. It's just that I've just put that into the kit. You need to ideally warm this up a little bit to rub it onto the leather. So it will rub on, but ideally warm it up with a hairdryer. It will be just as good. Put a bit of mineral oil onto the leather. So put this on first, rub it into the leather, put a little bit of mineral oil on. Basically stops it from drying out too much, and it just keeps the life in it there. Otherwise it just turns to powder and keeps coming off. So you put that on there. Like I say, I'll do a video separately with it, putting it on. Get my old knife, put it onto the leather. So this is what I would do with my Tormek. So if I've done it at 20 degrees, I would tilt it to 21.5 degrees, a little bit of pressure, and just bring it all the way down. However, you're not going to measure it, it doesn't really matter. So you just make sure that you put it on, so the blade is at least, the bevel, the cutting edge is at least flat on it. A little bit of pressure, not like pushing loads down, but just so you've got a good contact with it, and bring it all the way down. You've done one side, you turn it over onto the opposite side, and you bring it back. So as you bring the knife up, you're pulling away and you're getting to the tip. So the whole knife gets covered, or the whole edge comes across. What you will find is this edge with the compound on will start to turn black. And all you're doing is polishing steel off that onto here. It's nothing to worry about, it's what should happen. and this edge will start to shine up because basically you're polishing it. So you're doing one side and you're doing the other side, one side and then the other side. You do that 10 times, get your microfiber cloth, clean all the compound off the blade, and then you swap it to the opposite side. So same again, press it into the blade, and you do the exactly same method on either side for 10 times on the clean side. Don't put any compound or anything onto this side. You want to keep it clean as possible. If you've got a large enough bag, put it into the bag, write down with a permanent marker. Sharpies are always good. Dirty side, so that always touches that part of the leather. It's not essential, it's just a good practice thing to do. Then again, 10 sides on the clean side, and then that is your knife stropped, sharpened up and ready to go again. If you get to the point where you need to actually put an edge back on because it's been chipped or anything like that, I have got some diamond stones coming that I'm going to have a play about with, that have like a bracket that you can put onto the side. More dedicated to kitchen knives, but again, I'm going to add that into a separate video. Some people use a Lansky system. I recommend one of these. So Work Sharp. Again, I used it on my unzipper. I just find them a really handy bit of kit. Slightly better in my opinion than what the Lansky system is. Although you can get the, I don't know if the Lansky one, the old system's a bit cheaper, I'm not entirely sure. And the only reason why is that when I put this together, push it together, there we are, is that the Lansky has three or four separate pieces where you put the rod into, and that's the angle that you work at. At least with the Work Sharp, you can adjust the height here, so it works on the whatever the angle is there. And the bracket on the Lansky is, well, mind you, you can just take it out and turn it over. This is just magnetised and it just sticks in. Again, with the Lansky system, it all depends on how wide the knife is, because obviously it's an angle and all angles are on measurement. So if you've got a blade that is that long, I'm going to say that's set at 20 degrees up to there. If you put a wider blade into it so it sticks out to here, it won't actually be 20 degrees. It'd be a fraction different. That's not overly important, but this system, it's got diamond stones and a ceramic stone. There's a bit more of a, this one is the plastic version. There's a bit more flex in it. There is a metal version that's probably a bit more robust, but to be honest, using this for sharpening, I showed how I did it with the unzipper. You use it in exactly the same fashion on a knife, on any knife. If you want a bit more detail on that, I can do a separate video. Again, I'll put it onto my Dainham Outdoors my Dainham Blades page. But that was probably as a basic. I've got my Tormek system, that costs a fortune. You can spend as much as you like sharpening knives. It's not always essential, but to me, if you've got a Work Sharp and a strop, you'll always be able to make a sharp knife. And to be honest, always maintain, actually, I'll put that to one side again. When it comes to using a strop, always strop your knives after use. And ideally, after your first, say, 5 uses, strop it after every single time. Basically, what you're doing is although the edge comes to a point and it's a micro bevel, over stropping it rounds it slightly because you're taking wear off. So, and as you're polishing it back up, you're taking a wire edge off it, you're taking the burr off it. You're actually strengthening your blade up by stropping it. So therefore, if you did it, you stropped it every time after your first 5 uses, then the next time must be every 3 or 4 uses. So therefore, it'll prolong the life of your blade, of your sharp edge, before you even get to a point where you need to sharpen it. If you just use that and you run it against bone and you just chipped it, you dropped it, whatever, and you just kept on using it and you got it till it was blunt, then you'd have to sharpen it again with a sharpening system. If you stropped it in between use, you'd keep that edge, you'd maintain it longer, therefore not needing to sharpen it as often. And if you're not confident in sharpening a knife, you just end up with a blunt knife that ends up being a draw queen. other part of the kit that for looking after your knife. So your mineral oil is for putting onto your strop. I've got camellia oil, which I'd put onto the blade. So basically, camellia oil is a food-safe oil. You can put it just with a bit of a rag, a cloth, whatever. Just put it onto the blade, wipe it off, make sure it's dry. That'll keep your blade in good order. And then, although not necessarily that you'd have a wooden handle, but if you've got a synthetic handle, it doesn't really matter. But if you've got a natural material, so therefore if you've got wood, if you've got one of the hybrid handles that I've made with a pine cone and what have you, just a little bit of wood wax, which is basically beeswax and mineral oil. Again, it's food safe. With a cloth or with your finger, rub it on first, then with a cloth just buff off all the excess, and it just keeps the handle in good order, so it keeps that nice and sealed up, and again, keeps it in good order and makes it last. Have I got anything else? I don't think I have. Oh, one last thing when it will come into knives. I think it might have been James that says that wants to keep it in good order and don't want to damage it. My opinion on anything like that: if I bought a knife and I'd spent a lot of money on it, I want to get to the point where that knife looks trashed. I don't mean like just not look after it. I mean look after it, but ends up with that you've shot that many deer, you've had to take apart that many deer, you've had to sharpen your knife so many times that the blade's gone from that shape, and basically you've worn it down, so you've gone, that's all that's left of the blade. That's where you want to end up in life. I've got a picture of a Bob Loveless. So RWL 34 is Robert something or other Loveless, Robert William Loveless, an American knife maker. And I've got a picture of in one of his books where the blade has been sharpened that often that there's hardly anything left of the blade because it's been used that much. My opinion is, if you've got a skin with no scars on it, you've led a boring life. It needs to be scratched, it needs to be used. Occasionally there might be a ding. It's got to tell a story. Don't have it as a draw queen. I'm quite happy for people to buy draw queens and keep filling them up, but I want them to be used and I want them to be trashed. And if it's good enough to hand down to your children, you ain't done enough with it. That's my own opinion. So with that, I'm going to finish off. It's probably an hour's worth of questions and me blathering on. I will try and get some other videos sorted out with the Cerakoting, using a strop, any other sharpening out like that. Any other questions, please do fire them up. For everybody that's managed to get this far. One more thing. Final thing, for everybody that has managed to get this far in the video, I want you to comment in it, I'm in, and I'm going to give away a hat. So in a week's time, I'm going to do a draw of everybody that's put commented I'm in at the bottom of this video, and whoever gets it, I'm going to send it out. You might be thinking I'm a bit of a cheapskate and I'm not giving a knife away. However, when I get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, I'm going to do the exact same thing, and I'm going to give away one of my naked blades, because that's the point where I can actually start making some money off of YouTube. It might not be a lot, but it's a benchmark, and it's a point that I want to get to. So at the minute, I'm in. What date we're going to be on? It is the 8th, so on the 15th of July, I'm going to do the draw. Actually, no, on the 14th of July, I'm going to do the draw. I'm going to post it up on the 15th, and I'm going to let you know who's won. So, for one of my caps, I might even put in one of my buffs as well. So, get your sends in for that. Keep an eye on, because when it gets to 1,000, I'll be putting another, I'll put in a knife up for a competition on there. But other than that, guys, thank you very much for watching. It's been a lot of work doing all this lot. It's been fun as well. I'll try and keep the videos coming. I've got a deer stalking outing in, for me, a week and a half's time. I'll get some videos up for that. Keep an eye on my Daneham Blades page as well. I won't see you tomorrow. I'll see you sometime next week. Thank you very much. I'll see you.